Christopher Hitchens is one of the most talented and prolific essayists of our time. He's now written a memoir. It's called Hitch 22. It's reviewed on the cover of this week's book review by Jennifer Senior, who says that Hitchens argues ruthlessly and writes like a drunken angel. I'm delighted that Christopher Hitchens is here to talk about his new book. Welcome, Christopher.
Thanks for having me.
All right, you have had one of the most interesting of contemporary lives. You take the reader through all of it in this memoir. So let's emphasize a few of the points in it. One is, like W.H. Auden, whom you mention in the book, you're a Brit who became an American. Why did you do it? When did you do it?
Well, when I was quite young, probably about 16, 17, I began to have a strong yearning to move to the United States. Or if not to move to it, to go across the Atlantic. I even had a recurring dream, which would have put me actually a few blocks from where we are meeting, Midtown Manhattan. I had never been, but I felt I would be at home there. And it was a desire I couldn't shake. It was no more explicable to me than the desire I had, well, the need really, to be a writer. It was what I felt I had to do. And now, at the ripe old age of 61, I realized that the two impulses or yearnings, whatever you might want to call them, were in fact versions of the same. That in order to become an independent writer, I had to leave my country of birth and come here.
Now, you were an established writer in England, so some would say you were successful writing for the New Statesman, brilliant member of a prominent literary generation. You mentioned some of your good friends, Martin Amis, Ian McEwan.
Yes.
You carved your place in it. Why did you need to come here to be really independent?
Because I honestly felt that being a member of a set and all that, fun though it was, and I hope I make it fun in the book, reminiscing about those lunches and that repartee, that it was becoming a bit too safe, too easy. And I was about to become 30, or probably had just turned 30. I thought, if I stay now, I'll stay forever. I'll never get out of here. And if I don't go to the United States, I'll never forgive myself. So I forced myself to leave what was a fairly, as you say, comfortable existence and start again.
Christopher, we all identify you with Washington. In the memoir, you describe your first days in New York City. What was it like? When did you first get here? What did you see?
I first came here in the summer of 1970. I came on a scholarship that my college at Oxford had given me, which was a traveling scholarship. Didn't have to do any work. You just were supposed to see the United States, and they gave me a list of people who'd been at the college who would put me up. And, well, I've never had a dream come true, and I sort of distrust dream rhetoric in general, and dream talk. This dream of being at Midtown Manhattan, it didn't start that promisingly. I mean, getting out at the Port Authority terminal isn't the finest way of seeing it.
We're right across the street from it now, and it hasn't gotten any better.
New York for the first time, but nonetheless. And there, right opposite, was the campaign office of Senator James Buckley. Join the March for America, it said, with a huge display of American flags. And, oh my God, it was a very sexy place. Everyone seemed to dress in a provocative manner. It never seemed to close, which was not true of London or England. Places started shut down at about 10. Matches were free in bars. You could get ice without begging for it. In fact, you had to stop them putting ice in your drink. In Britain, you had to crawl to get that.
And do those differences between London and New York, let's say, still hold?
No, they don't. London's improved a huge amount, as a matter of fact. London, for one thing, is very probably more multi-ethnic and multicultural than New York now, I would say, as well as a great deal bigger, of course. I go back a good bit. I have a son who's working there. I have a lot of friends there. I'm an Anglo-American. That's what I describe in my chapter about becoming an American is you can't shake being British, but you can, and you shouldn't want to, but you can transcend it.
Let's talk about some of your friends. Martin Amis, your wonderful portrait of him. The most brilliant conversationalist of your acquaintance. Seems to be the sharpest.
Yes, and the most merciless, because even for the sake of friendship, he won't allow you to make a sloppy remark or a slovenly one. He'll always point it out, whether it's in print or in conversation. He'll do it in a nice way, but very firmly. Appears to have read everything and to have remembered it. Can quote prose as well as poetry. Exceedingly funny, devoted to the language. I mean, in love with it and passionate in its defense, hating to see any debasement of its currency.
You say he marks up your manuscript.
Yes, you give him something to read, and he'll come back properly punctuated.
Let's talk about politics a little bit. You were long identified with the left, even the revolutionary left, but it will surprise listeners that you didn't come out of a background that would necessarily ordain that route for you.
No, my background is naval and military. My father, who we used to call the Commander, was our family nickname for him, because his identity was completely defined by being a lifer in the Royal Navy, and emerging from it after the war in the rank of commander, fairly low, medium rank. He didn't get promoted beyond it, slightly to his disappointment, and then was downsized by the Navy and beached, having been through an especially bitter and harsh wartime, in which he once told me he'd felt it was the only time he knew what he was really doing. So what I saw was a very conservative man, extremely insular, very English, very right-wing, very loyal to the empire and the monarchy and the traditions of the service and all of that, who'd got, in a sense, nothing out of it, nothing in return, who'd been rather taken for granted and then rather dumped. So I felt sorry for him, which is probably not a nice thing to feel for your father necessarily. And in consequence, partly, I began to feel contempt for the establishment that had taken him so much for granted. So, though I think I retained some of the values that he had, admiring things like thrift and modesty and so forth, though that might not be the first two things people would associate with me. I didn't say I practiced them, I just admire them. It moved me very much to the left, that experience.
You also write about class in America. Americans like to think,
Yes.
we like to think we don't have a class system, and some say the genius of it is that it's invisible, but it is there. Do you
Well,
see
yes,
it?
there's an old joke, old Marxist joke, was the Oxford tutor meets a former student of his at some conference. And, they're chatting, and he says, "Well, what have you been getting up to? What's your work these days?" Now, the graduate student says, "Well, I've been doing a thesis on the persistence of the class system in the United States of America." And the old Don says, "Oh, that's fascinating. I didn't think they had a class system in the United States of America." Well, he said, "Well, nobody does." He said, "But that's how it persists."
And so it does, you think?
Not in a way recognizable as someone brought up in England, no. I mean, you'd have to notice that there's a much greater emphasis on meritocracy here, but one does notice things like dynastic political families, for example, and to a degree, a dynastic influence in business and finance. It remains to me, in an almost naive, impressionistic way, exactly what it promised it would be, which is a land of opportunity, and has been very nice to me, and eventually seduced me from my English allegiance and made me want to become an American and to identify with the United States.
And you became a citizen
Yeah.
quite recently.
In 2007, I think.
And how do politics look to you at this moment? It's an interesting time. We're seeing sort of radicalism on the right, or does it appear different?
I have a feeling that radicalism on the right, like the so-called Christian conservative movement, is a little bit exaggerated. It's an easy way for the Democratic National Committee to scare people into making donations, I sometimes think. I think it's rather exaggerated, but it's certainly getting a new purchase on the argument. And though I voted for the president both positively and negatively, in that I couldn't have voted McCain-Palin, and having read then Senator Obama's books, I thought, well, it's nice to have a good writer running for president, and his memoirs are the revelation of a very intelligent and thoughtful and humorous man. That doesn't happen every day. I think that his humor and intelligence and niceness and open-mindedness may be, in some ways, a disadvantage to him. Quite a lot of the major problems of our time do not, in fact, arise out of misunderstandings, as he sometimes gives the impression of thinking, or hoping that they do. Our quarrel with the Islamic Republic of Iran, for example, does not arise out of a cultural misunderstanding. It arises out of a real serious disagreement about the way things ought to be. And I don't think he's going to be able to finesse things like that. Or North Korea, or BP. He's had a big lesson, I think, in how intractable politics really is, and how impervious to charm.
And where do you place yourself? Anywhere on the political spectrum these days? It's always a question, always a matter of speculation as far as you're concerned.
Well, the reason the book is called Hitch-22 is it's a small joke on the large contradiction of the late Joseph Heller. After a lifetime that I describe, it has had quite a few commitments in it and quite a few allegiances. I'm now really only identified with and feel an allegiance with a group of skeptics who, you know, sometimes are called the new atheists, rather pointlessly, but people who defend science and reason against bigotry and superstition. The catch is that we're sure only that nothing is sure, and that we're certain only of the uncertainty principle, and that we're resolved only to be in doubt. But that might sound like a soft position, but it's not in fact, because it puts us in direct conflict with the newest form of totalitarianism, which is of those who have perfect faith and believe that they know the truth and have had it revealed to them. These people are exceedingly dangerous. And if there's one thing I hope that's a thread in my memoir, it's the struggle to evolve a position that's consistently anti-totalitarian. And this is congruent with that. But it is a catch, or in a more minor key, a hitch, if you'll allow that.
Thanks a lot, Christopher.
My honor.
It's Christopher Hitchens, whose new book, Hitch-22, a Memoir, is reviewed on the cover of this week's book review.